anturma chaya no camaru anuri, no camai, no camwaka, na anuri, no yuyuá, na warron chinavo punk, tu chinan chaval aqui, chinamo kikirani, tsai chavakirani, tsai makikirani. Awama wanana, no mau no wai sharai.
For the global business community, the top concern for the next 2 years is not conflict or climate. It is disinformation and misinformation, followed closely by polarization within our societies. This is not a time for conflicts or polarization. This is a time to build trust. This is a time to drive global collaboration more than ever before. This requires immediate and structural responses to match the size of the global challenges. I believe it can be done.
We are finding ourselves in a place where we have increasing polarization everywhere, and everything feels binary when it doesn't need to be. So I think we're going to have to think about a recalibration of a whole range of human rights that are playing out online, you know, from freedom of speech to the freedom to, you know, to be free from online violence, or the right of data protection to the right to child dignity.
You know, it's absolutely critical that we accelerate. I am convinced beyond any doubt that because of the decisions being made in the marketplace now, because, I mean, you know as well as I do, even if, you know, I don't want this, obviously, but if you wound up with a different president who was opposed to climate crisis, I got news for you. No one politician anywhere in the world can undo what is happening now. The marketplace is doing this. And the only issue for all of us is not whether or not we can get or will get to a low-carbon, no-carbon economy globally. We will. The only question is, will we get there in time to meet the challenge of the scientists in order to avoid the worst consequences of this crisis? That is what is at stake.
I am absolutely delighted to be able to manage and moderate a session today at the Open Forum. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart with Arctic Base Camp. It's entitled On Thin Ice. Now, we do know that the world has 16 climate tipping points, and I think what is less well known is that 9 of those 16 are in the polar regions. Science has also informed us that 6 of those tipping points will actually be triggered if we get to a positive 2-degree warmer world. Unfortunately, 5 of those are also in the poles, so the poles will actually determine the fate of humanity. Now, you shouldn't just trust me on that. I'm a social scientist, so I don't actually do that measurement data.
Democracy often depends on trustworthy systems being able to hold untrustworthy individuals, right? And so what Trump is a master at is sort of completely rattling and bringing down sort of the structures of institutions. And this would be the ultimate act. I can be elected from prison. It's the ultimate screw you.
I think that, you know, the Georgia case in particular, because he can't pardon himself, because the state case, the state RICO charge, is going to be an ultimate test. So I think, you know, if he wins and if you know, we're going to be in a constitutional crisis.
I want to make sure that we've got time.
If not a bigger, you know, violent crisis.
Yeah, no, it's a very curious thing, Alex, because if you sort of, I read a lot of what Timothy Snyder, who I know has been here, writes, and you think to yourself, this contest between democracy and the Constitution that seems to be playing out, and it's hard to interpret.
Why? Because in order to open an account, you need to have an ID.
Right.
And I have to say that when I started this job, there were actually very little countries in Africa or Latin America that had one ubiquitous type of ID, and certainly that it was digital, and certainly that it was biometric. And we've really worked with all our partners to actually help that being, to grow this. And the interesting part of it is that, yes, it is very necessary for financial services, but not only.
Sure.
It's also good for school enrollment. It's also good for health, who actually got a vaccination or not. It's very good to get your subsidies, from the government. So this has not only effect to the financial services. It's a very important issue.
I think there's a very specific challenge for the legacy brands like the New York Times and like the Wall Street Journal. I mean, interestingly, when there's a big news event, a big world event, people still come to the legacy brands. We still have a lot of trust. But I think you only have to go back. I think we have to maintain that trust, and we have to work at maintaining it in a way that we didn't have to do not so long ago. So if you go back really not that long ago, as I say, we owned the news. We were the gatekeepers, and we very much owned the facts as well. If it said it in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, then that was a fact. Nowadays, people can go to all sorts of different sources for the news, and they're much more questioning about what we're saying. So it's no longer good enough for us just to say, this is what happened, or this is the news. We have to explain our working. So readers expect to understand how we source stories. They want to know how we go about getting stories. We have to sort of lift the bonnet, as it were, and in a way that newspapers aren't used to doing, and explain to people what we're doing. We need to be much more transparent about how we go about collecting the news.
I cannot think of a topic more urgent, actually, than the intersection of climate change and health. And I apologize that my back is to some folks. The climate crisis is a health crisis, fundamentally. And that actually means it is a crisis, therefore, also of our stability, our security, our economic growth, and our fundamental future as a globe. When we think about it, health is fundamental to everything that we are trying to do. A country like Zambia is now shutting down its schools because of a cholera outbreak that is from increased rainfall. Malaria is spreading in areas where it's been eradicated or removed in many of these countries. We are losing progress against our sustainable development goals. We have put billions of dollars towards those goals, and we're truly losing progress. We're now about to see the statistics of the deaths that we're seeing by 2050 is more than double what the statistics used to be. This is not a future problem, though. We always talk in future numbers. This is a problem happening here and now today. 2023 was an apocalyptic year in terms of extreme weather events and what we've seen happen. That is about to get worse.
It's hard for us, I'm a climate scientist, to understand misinformation, disinformation, because, we've been saying, for instance, this year, 2023, we had the warmest year in 125,000 years. You have to go back to the last interglacial period, all the record-breaking climate extremes. We are saying that for decades now, more and more. So it's hard to believe why misinformation, disinformation, because the science is showing the risk of climate change. So we have to understand the way, not to communicate, because science is communicating, but why some people still do not believe in that.
Mm-hmm. What I find striking, and you probably have the same thing also as a journalist, what I noticed in the last years, let's say in the last 5 years, starting with the Brexit, then we had the pandemic, then we had the ongoing climate issue as well. When did the word expert become almost an insult in some circles, or that some circles started to mistrust the word expert itself?
Well, as I was saying, really we have to become much more effective in responsible advocacy.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm not sure who's hosting. It's so good to see you, all of our colleagues, and I just want to start by conveying President Biden's strong, enduring support for Ukraine. This at a time when you continue to face an almost daily onslaught from Russia, attacking infrastructure, attacking civilians, and we see that every day, but we also see the incredible courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people, the courage and resilience of your security forces. we're determined to sustain our support for Ukraine, and we're working very closely with Congress in order to do that.
But the truth is that we are fighting a war for the entire universe, for the free world. I always say, if Israel was not there, Europe will be next, because these barbaric jihadists want to get all of us out of the region and want to get all of Europe out of its place as well. And the United States is next too. So this war is something of an essential element in the history of humankind.
We have these discrete problems that you've identified, but they're also, as you've also identified, connected.
Yeah.
And this is why these larger constructs are also so important to keep in mind. If we can change the larger direction of a region like the Middle East, a lot of these other problems will be minimized, if not totally eliminated. The excuses, the rationales that various troublemakers have for making trouble, they go away. So that's also part of an effective way of dealing with the challenge. Look, on Iran, I'm not going to put it on a scale of 1 to 10, but I think it was a big mistake to tear up the Iran nuclear agreement. We had Iran's nuclear program in a box. Since the agreement was torn up, it's escaped from that box. And we're now at a place where we didn't want to be because we don't have the agreement. So I think that was deeply unfortunate.
The other key in order to have better prepared and to address the disease X is the pandemic agreement. The pandemic agreement can bring all the experience, all the challenges that we have faced, and all the solutions into one. And that agreement can help us to prepare for the future in a better way, because this is about a common enemy. And without a shared response, starting from the preparedness, we will face the same problem as COVID. And deadline for the pandemic agreement is May 2024, and member states are negotiating. This is between countries. And I hope they will deliver this pandemic agreement by that time, on the deadline. Because if this generation cannot do it, we're the lived community, we have the first-hand experience, I don't think incoming generation, the next generation will do it. So for our children and grandchildren's sake, I think we have to convert all the lessons we have learned into this pandemic and prepare the world for the future, because this is a common global interest, and national interest, very narrow national interest, should not come into the way.
This is a hugely transformative moment in the whole global economy. I think that right now we're living through a moment which is comparable only to the Industrial Revolution itself, in terms of the energy transition and the way we need to retool all of our manufacturing. That is huge. And our view is there's a lot that Canada can offer to the world in this moment. We have the critical minerals and metals that you need to build a green economy. We have a lot of clean energy. 85% of our grid is already clean, and we are investing heavily in building more clean energy. We are a country that believes in manufacturing, has manufacturing know-how and capacity. And then you guys spoke about industrial policy. The thing that is new about industrial policy is we are developing our economies, growing our economies at a time when we also need to accomplish the green transition. And I spoke yesterday to a very significant international business leader who is also a big investor in Canada. And he said to me, all the countries in the world need to be very careful that decarbonization does not mean deindustrialization. I thought that was an extremely smart comment, and Canada is absolutely determined that decarbonization for us will mean more jobs, more growth, more manufacturing, and we recognize government needs to play a role to make that happen.
Since we have to accelerate action and ambition from all sides, not only business, governments as well. And I think also there's a lot of individual change that we have to promote to just really get where we need to get. So, you work on a very new concept called ecocide. So many people don't understand what this legal definition is and what does it bring. So can you please explain a little bit to us, but also tell us, in your opinion, what has to change in current business and investment models to make sure this long-term thinking and ecological considerations are included in decisions and practices?
Absolutely. So, I mean, ecocide as a word is becoming better known around the world, and the concept is generally mass damage and destruction of nature. But legally speaking, what our organisation and other collaborators aim to do is to have this recognised legally as a serious crime. Because one of the issues that sort of pervades all of this discussion is that we have a kind of cultural, very ingrained habit of not taking damage to nature as seriously as we take damage to people and property. And that, I mean, you know, if you're campaigning for human rights, at least you know mass murder, torture, all of these things are serious crimes. But there's no equivalent in the environmental space. And so, you know, unlike an international crime like genocide that involves a specific intent, with ecocide, what we see is actually what people are trying to do, what businesses are trying to do, is make money, is farm, is fish, is do all of these things that are, you know, producing energy and so on, as well. But what's missing is the awareness and the conscience around the side effects, around the collateral damage that happens with that. Mm-hmm. You know, we're all talking a little bit as though, you know, the changes that are happening and the shocks that are happening are inevitable, but actually there are quite simple. For example, you know, with ecocide, it's a really straightforward kind of intervention at the legal level that could actually start to steer everything in a healthier direction.
We're going to require the public sector. So if I just take the first, there is no realistic solution to the climate transition that does not involve a globally coordinated system of carbon taxes. There's no realistic or fair solution that does not involve a globally coordinated system of carbon taxes. And Ngozi at the WTO is coordinating this with several other international organizations. It's still early days. There's a perception that it's unjust, it's unfair, it'll lead to inflation. In fact, quite the contrary. If we don't do this, the countries that will suffer most ultimately are the developing countries. They're going to be the worst affected by climate change. If we don't do this, it's ordinary vulnerable communities that will suffer the most. What we need is a system of carbon taxes coupled with subsidies for vulnerable households and a stream of funding for the developing world to allow them to engage in investments in mitigation and adaptation that allows them to keep growing. And that's a real opportunity. It's a fair solution, and it's...
That order seems to not be the order anymore. We are on the way to a new order, so we are between orders. Do you agree with that, or are there ways of what are we able to keep on the positive side from the old order to bring into a new world order, and how can we avoid that new world order becomes like a jungle growing back, and we rather have an order based on international law and the principles that have brought us prosperity and freedom for decades?
I guess, and maybe this is the old kind of teacher in me coming out. I think of this a little bit more about a transition of eras rather than a transition of orders, but the two are kind of cousins of one another. The reason I draw the distinction is because I don't think the international order built after 1945 is getting replaced wholesale with some new order. It will obviously evolve as it has evolved multiple times over the decades since 1945. But I do think in a more sharp and distinctive way, we are moving into a new era, and that's what I talked about in my remarks, that we are, you know, the post-Cold War era has come to a close. We're at the start of something new. We have the capacity to shape what that looks like, and at the heart of it will be many of the core principles and core institutions of the existing order, adapted for the challenges that we face today.
My fourth suggestion is to strengthen cooperation on green development.
to actively tackle climate change worldwide. Humanity still faces many challenges in addressing climate change and promoting green and low-carbon transition. Talks about the need for stronger cooperation on climate governance are often accompanied by actions of erecting barriers to green trade. Some high-quality and efficient green and low-carbon technologies and products cannot flow freely. It is important that we uphold the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, better synergize our green development strategies, remove various barriers in this field, and jointly work for a complete transition to a greener economy and society. We need to fully implement the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, strengthen global development cooperation, bridge development gaps, and create new cooperation highlights in areas such as poverty alleviation, food security, and industrialization, so as to benefit the people of all countries with more fruits of cooperation.
I don't think that that's the fundamental. I don't think technology is the fundamental issue in democracy. Democracy is messy. I mean, democracy is about contestation of ideas. It's about plurality. It's about people having different truths, actually. Now, fundamentally, how society lives together civically in those contestations is obviously quite tricky. But I think that if we play too much on this disinformation card, we're taking the responsibility away from ourselves to actually create a narrative that inspires people to vote and to believe, in democracy and democratic institutions. And on the institutional part, I think that we can talk about institutions as these abstract things, but institutions are also about people. And we just heard this point about untrustworthy people, and we talked about things in the United States like checks and balances, which aren't written anywhere but are customs. And one man, Donald Trump, literally came in and just took that all away. But when I see this, when I look at this, more globally regarding democracy, I also say to myself, when was this great time that everybody got along so well and things were going so great? I mean, I think I think that we really have to be careful here in this nostalgia for a time past, because a lot of the reactions we're seeing in society are actually reactions to positive things like equality for women, and greater diversity, which come with backlash.
But as American Jews, I think the feeling is one of aloneness and being hated and being unmoored and all these things that we had maybe fooled ourselves into thinking that this wasn't so bad, we're not really experiencing anti-Semitism, it's never going to be this horrible. It happened. And then, as you've been saying, we kind of saw who our friends were and who our friends weren't. And there were too many in the weren't category, some who we thought were friends, and just shocking.
The kind of person who will come into the next conservative administration is going to be governed by one principle, and that is destroying the grasp that political elites and unelected technocrats have over the average person. And if I may, I will be candid and say that the agenda that every single member of the administration needs to have is to compile a list of everything that's ever been proposed at the World Economic Forum and object all of them wholesale. I think whoever the next conservative president is going to take on the power of the elites, which I mentioned earlier. But the thing that I want to drive home here, the very reason that I'm here at Davos, is to explain to many people in this room and who are watching, with all due respect, nothing personal, but that you're part of the problem. Political elites tell the average people on 3 or 4 or 5 issues that the reality is X, when in fact reality is why. Take immigration. Elites tell us that open borders and even illegal immigration are okay. The average person tells us in the United States that both rob them of the American way of life. They're right. President Trump will take that on behalf of the average American. Elites also tell us that public safety isn't a problem in big American cities. Just travel to New York or Washington or Dallas, Texas. The average person will tell you that the lack of public safety damages not just the American way of life, but their life. President Trump will take that on. Thirdly, I guess the favorite at the World Economic Forum is climate change. Elites tell us that we have this existential crisis with so-called climate change, so much so that climate alarmism is probably the greatest cause for mental health crisis in the world. The solutions, the average person know, based on climate change are far worse and more harmful and cost more human lives, especially in Europe during the time that you need heating, than do the problem and the problems themselves.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Today, I'm here to tell you that the Western world is in danger. And it is endangered because those who are supposed to have to defend the values of the West are co-opted by a vision of the world that inexorably leads to socialism and thereby to poverty. Unfortunately, in recent decades, motivated by some well-meaning individuals willing to help others, and others motivated by the wish to belong to a privileged caste, the main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We're here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world. Rather, they are the root cause. Do believe me, no one better placed than us, Argentines, to testify to these 2 points. When we adopted the model of freedom back in 1860, in 35 years we became a leading world power. And when we embraced collectivism over the course of the last 100 years, we saw how our citizens started to become systematically impoverished, and we dropped to spot number 140 globally. But before having the discussion, it would first be important for us to take a look at the data that demonstrate why free enterprise capitalism is not just the only possible system to end world poverty, but also that it's the only morally desirable system to achieve this. If we look at the history of economic progress, we can see how between the year 0 and the year 1800 approximately, world per capita GDP practically remained constant throughout the whole reference period. If you look at a graph of the evolution of economic growth throughout the history of humanity, you would see a hockey stick graph, an exponential function that remained constant for 90% of the time and which was exponentially triggered starting in the 19th century. The only exception to this history of stagnation was in the late 15th century with the discovery of the American continent. But for this exception, throughout the whole period between the year 0 and the year 1800, global per capita GDP stagnated. Now, it's not just that capitalism brought about an explosion in wealth from the moment it was adopted as an economic system. But also, if you look at the data, what you will see is that growth continues to accelerate throughout the whole period. And throughout the whole period between the year 0 and the year 1800, the per capita GDP growth rate remained stable at around 0.02% annually, so almost no growth. Starting in the 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution, the compound annual growth rate was 0.66%. And at that rate, in order to double per capita GDP, you would need some 107 years. Now, if you look at the period between the year 1900 and the year 1950, the growth rate accelerated to 1.66% a year. So you no longer need 107 years to double double per capita GDP, but 66. And if you take the period between 1950 and the year 2000, you will see that the growth rate was 2.1%. Again, the CAGR, which would mean that in only 33 years we could double the world's per capita GDP. This trend, far from stopping, remains well alive today. If we take the period between the year 2000 and 2023, the growth rate again accelerated to 3% a year, which means that we could double world per capita GDP in just 23 years. That said, when you look at per capita GDP since the year 1800 and until today, what you will see is that after the Industrial Revolution, global per capita GDP multiplied by over 15 times, which meant a boom in growth that lifted 90% of the global population out of poverty. We should remember that by the year 1800, about 95% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, and that figure dropped to 5% by the year 2020, prior to the pandemic. The conclusion is obvious. Far from being the cause of our problems, free trade capitalism as an economic system is the only instrument we have to end hunger, poverty, and extreme poverty across our planet. Therefore, in concluding, I would like to leave a message for all business people here and for those who are not here in person but are following from around the world. Do not be intimidated either by the political class or by parasites who live off the state. Do not surrender to a political class that only wants to stay in power and retain its privileges. You are social benefactors. You're heroes. You're the creators of the most extraordinary period of prosperity we've ever seen. Let no one tell you that your ambition is immoral. If you make money, it's because you offer a better product at a better price, thereby contributing to general well-being. Do not surrender to the advance of the state. The state is not the solution. The state is the problem itself. You are the true protagonists of this story. And rest assured that as from today, Argentina is your staunch, unconditional ally. Thank you very much, and long live freedom. Damn it.
Today, we stand really at a unique juncture in human history, facing challenges that are as diverse as they are profound. The special role of the World Economic Forum is not to look just at one single issue. It is a place where at the beginning of the year, we come together to analyze the state of the world in a systemic and strategic way, and hopefully to find common ground to generate positive impact. Geopolitically, our world, as my friend and colleague said, Børge Brende, geopolitically, our world is more interconnected, yet paradoxically, more divided and fragmented than ever. Economically, we grapple with sluggish growth. The very fabric of our societies is inclusiveness, which is in doubt. Environmentally, we confront the relentless challenges of climate change, a threat to our planet's delicate balance. And technologically, we navigate uncharted waters where innovation offers boundless opportunities, but also unprecedented risks. Those deeply transformative challenges, which are actually the cornerstone of our program, lead to uncertainty, generalized fear, and pessimism. They force us into a mode of short-term crisis management at the detriment of long-term strategic and sustainable solutions. This reactionary approach undermines our collective faith in the future, and Here, we losing the face of our future, we risk to become much more ego-centered and on a national and individual level. To break this cycle, we need a paradigm shift. We must rebuild trust, and that's actually the theme of our meeting. We have to rebuild trust